Hey everybody, Bryan here again with another episode of the Secret Sauce Podcast. And I'm really excited to just dive into some like meat and potatoes. This one's going to be quick. All right. What we're talking about today is chatbots with AI and how difficult they can be to deploy and what's frustrating customers. And also just like one use case that illustrates just how a backwards reactive and non-customer friendly approach to disputes on these chatbots has played out for a major airline, Air Canada. So this document right here is from the National Customer Rage Index. Yeah, that's a thing. It goes back to the 70s and it measures the frustration of the consumers and their interaction with business stuff and their frustrations with it. And this was like a 90-page report, and you can get it yourself. I'll put a link in the comments. But this is a screen grab that I have from the most recent one that was published late last year. So this is a chart that shows the most and least favorable views of AI when people complain and what is the trigger on the view of that thing. So these are all dichotomies. So you have effort and effortless, right? One is going to have a more positive view, one is going to have a more negative view. And they highlight 5 things that are the least favorable. And they're highlighted there: frustrating, unemotional, impersonal, unnecessary, and company focused. So I went through and just put a little thought to this. Why would somebody complain about a chatbot being frustrating? Well, you have to repeat yourself, which means you are having to constantly give them the same information over and over again because it's not capturing that correctly and feeding it back into the response of the chat. So the turns in the conversation is a limitation of a chatbot potentially to recall context from the narrative. It's not intuitive in the sense that you're telling them something that a human would pick up on, but the chatbot clearly doesn't have it. So you have to be a much more low context and over explain your frustration and problem. And again, customer service chatbots are the main use for chatbots. So you already have kind of a frustrated person now having to over explain their problem. They're having to think more about why they don't like your brand. Another thing that's frustrating is it only has a limited ability to help. Why have the chatbot if it can't do much? Unemotional. So in customer service, the first thing you want to do is acknowledge the frustration from the person. You need to match that energy. If someone comes in hot, they're angry, you need to be able to meet that. If it's unemotional, it's going to be very robotic and it's not going to feel warm or like the person's being heard. And that's really important in customer service, especially when people are frustrated. So the inputs are going to maybe just produce a cold, legal approved response to keep the company uber safe, very conservative. And like, we don't want to say anything that would get us in trouble. And it's not acknowledging that frustration. Impersonal, just bland, generic responses that aren't tailored to the actual questions being asked. It just goes back to some like basic generic answer. And it's not that personal experience that, again, if somebody's talking to a human, you're going to get. Unnecessary. So I look at this as there's a lot of extra words. So I'm getting old now. And when I see AI slop, it's just like tons of words on the screen. And I have to like go through an unnecessary amount of context just to see what is being said back to me and what the point is. One of my favorite prompts is, please say less. Good Lord, AI. And then the last one I think is really interesting is company focused. So this has a lot more in the dichotomy that I want to dig into. So customer focus versus company focus. And what I'm picking up here is outcomes achieved. So if I'm a customer and I have a frustration, I have a problem with the business and I'm now interacting with their chatbot, and I am able to intuitively sense that the chatbot is only trying to drive towards a company-focused benefit from the outcome. How does the company get out of the situation? How do the company stay safe? That's going to cause a lot of frustration. And it actually is a great segue into the use case that I have hidden behind here, which is the Air Canada chatbot case. And I've done some public speaking on this before, and I really like this use case because it illustrates a couple of things, which is the problems as a business when you adopt AI don't need to be like massive, huge class action lawsuits. They can actually be incredibly small, and how you react as a business is going to really detail this. So this is a couple years old, right? So early 24. So this isn't new. This isn't like cutting edge, but this just illustrates some really good points. So what happened? What's this use case about? Air Canada lost a small claims court case when their AI chatbot hallucinated and made up a bereavement policy for a discount on a ticket that he was trying to book when going to a funeral for a past loved one, right? And the chatbot made it up. And what I think is crazy is we're talking about a total of $800 here. And I'm talking about a major airline. Air Canada is a major airline, and they lost a court case. They actually went to court over $800 with the argument that the chatbot is not the responsibility of the company, right? The chatbot, yes, it made something up. It helped someone with a bereavement policy and got them a couple $100 cheaper flight. Meanwhile, the legal team fought this and went so far to say that the chatbot's output of the bereavement policy that it hallucinated and made up was not their responsibility to make sure it got right. Specifically, Air Canada argues it cannot be held liable for information provided by one of its agents, servants, or representatives, including a chatbot, which means the legal position of Air Canada is it is not responsible for anything that the people or the software say to customers. And it's crazy to me. Air Canada suggests the chatbot is a separate legal entity and responsible for its own actions. Listen, chatbots have been around for decades. The difference is this is generative responses. It generated a hallucination and made up a policy or a discount for a customer. And that could have been in the past pre-programmed, hard-coded in. Yes, we have this discount. They're responsible the same way. The output is the output. It's just how the output is derived. We use LLMs and generative AI because we're so cutting edge, and this is going to cut out all of our support costs. But oh, by the way, we don't actually care about if the responses are wrong because it's not our fault. But we're going to make all these changes and reduce all of our headcount and get rid of our customer support staff so that we can use this technology because it's game changer revolutionary. But again, we're not responsible. See how the system fails? Good God. Anyways, short, sweet, to the point. Chatbots are such an easy way for you to get it wrong or get it right. The decisions, the governance of these tools and software, that's where you legally lose these battles. More and more companies should be challenged for wrong outputs because they will lose if they take the position of it's not our responsibility, which means that the only winning position here is we are being responsible and we proactively put things in place. And we're sorry that this happened to you. We will honor the hallucination. There's like two ways these things go. So the secret sauce here is just do the right thing, make the right choices with how you want things to be communicated to your customers. Take accountability in the output of your generative AI solutions. And more so, if they go wrong, you are legally responsible for whatever happens from that generative AI output. You cannot argue legally anymore because there is now precedent. And in one court case, there will always be reference that the company is responsible for the output. The liability falls on the humans who released that software, who approved that chatbot to go into live production with customers. The liability falls on the people. The people who make decisions and argue for the company cannot hide behind the fact that this software is being deployed too fast and they haven't done the right things in terms of checks, balances, governance, operationalization, observability, continuous monitoring, auditing, and getting their data right. How crazy is it that they didn't take enough time to test to make sure that the chatbot, through a common conversation, what is your bereavement policy, that it wouldn't hallucinate and make up a response versus grabbing the correct field from an existing policy and a data source behind the scenes. That's such a simple mapping exercise. Testing, validation, verification never, ever crossed the mind of Air Canada, in my opinion. And the lawsuit supports that opinion. So anyways, secret sauce, just do things right. Invest into your governance, invest into these testing and verification processes, and you will most likely not create a bunch of company focused and frustrating chatbots that people dislike, hate, and complain about, because that is your interaction with your brand. Trust me, there will be so much more of it, and it's going to be much larger from an impact perspective. There's so many class action lawsuits because of the exact same mistakes that Air Canada made, but in higher risk applications. People getting jobs, interviews. So Workday, class action lawsuit. People getting denied healthcare benefits, UHG, class action lawsuit. Using AI to predict the purchase of a home or not. Zillow lost 75% of their stock value because they didn't test their AI modeling. There are so many ways that things can go wrong if you don't do the basics. If you don't start with data governance, model governance, system integration governance, continuous monitoring, and audit. Those 5 layers of the framework for governing intelligence is so critical and important to avoid situations like this and people getting on and speaking about failures with your brand dripping all over them. How's that? Secret sauce.